Hey, it's Derek from WatchingCode.net. So if you've been following along with my YouTube channel here, you've probably noticed several functional JavaScript videos. This is something that's been interesting to me in the last couple of months, and I've been trying to head down this path. But this isn't the first time that I've tried to learn functional programming in general. I've spent a fairly considerable amount of time trying to learn functional programming over the last, 6, maybe 8 years or so. And I've always given up at some point. I've always said, you know what, I can't. I can't wrap my head around this, the language, the thought process, I'm too steeped in object-oriented ideas. And so I've always given up on it, even though, I've probably taken a few good ideas out of it each time I've sat down and tried to learn it. But it brings up a question in my mind about how we learn things and how we do new and different things in our careers and in our jobs. And that question is whether or not the all-or-nothing mentality is really valid. So years ago, I was working at a company that had a very large application. It was a maintenance system, basically. There were a lot of ground-based vehicles that would come into this maintenance system, have parts ordered, have information tracked about it, have a lot of different things happen in order to make sure that these vehicles were maintained properly and, put back out into the work that they were doing so that they could last as long as possible. It was a very complex system that involved a lot of moving parts and a lot of process and logic and ideas and everything else you can imagine. But at some point in time, the team that was working on this convinced the upper management of the company that the product was worth taking to the next level. And by next level, I mean they wanted to abstract a lot of the core concepts and ideas out of this piece of software and make it something more generic and reusable and configurable so that it could be sold in third-party markets. Now, the company thought this was a great idea. They said, all right, we love it, let's do it, let's head down this path and see what happens. Well, the team that was building this decided that they wanted to implement the new version of the software in a slightly updated, newer version of the language that they had been using, a different framework on top of the language they had been using. Instead of just working in C# and WinForms, they wanted to work in C# and Silverlight. Now, nobody on the team had a lot of Silverlight experience. A few people had played with it and really enjoyed working with it, but the team as a whole didn't have a lot of experience with it. And they jumped in anyways. They went full bore, they just took off running, and very quickly ran into some snags. They didn't understand the asynchronous nature of Silverlight. They didn't understand the client-server nature of the way things needed to be set up in that asynchronous architecture. They had a lot of problems figuring out the technology, not bringing the business into the technology, but just figuring out the technology to begin with. They couldn't even get the business into the technology because they spent so much time working on the technology and just learning the tool set and the architecture and the process around it. And several months into this project, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it was, the company had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably $200,000 to $300,000 on this, with all the team members and time and investment and everything. And the project was scrapped because the team was unable to produce the project, the end goal, the results that were needed to make this project viable in any third-party marketplaces. Essentially what they did was created a way to just put data into a form, save it to a database, and have it load back on the screen. It was a very difficult situation for a lot of people and for a lot of reasons. It made the company very gun-shy about investing in projects like this in the future. It made the team rather upset that they had their project taken away from them when they were all having fun learning this technology and building something new. It made the project leadership very wary of the technology stack. It caused a lot of problems. And ultimately, I see this not as a failure of the team or the project management or the technology, but of the mindset that everybody involved had. And that mindset was, unfortunately, the all-or-nothing mindset. I don't know how much time they spent looking for a solution to this, but they couldn't find a solution to the take it one step at a time problem. They couldn't just take the Windows application they had built and put a little bit of Silverlight in here and a little bit over there. They couldn't find that pathway to get from A to B, so they said, well, forget it, we're just not going to travel that path at all. We're just going to start with B as the starting point and just go from there. So they jumped in headfirst in the Silverlight and just ran with it. And that caused a lot of problems, and this is not an unusual story. There are countless stories around the interwebs about this kind of all-or-nothing mentality backfiring. Yeah, you're going to find places where people really dive in head first and they completely switch gears and they just go and do something brand new and it works out great for them. And that's the kind of, romanticized mythology that we create in our minds about new and different and better. But the reality that we live within and work within every day is that this all-or-nothing mentality is incredibly dangerous for the business, for the team, for the technologies that we're trying to introduce. There is a tremendous amount of risk involved in having that kind of mentality. I mean, even something as simple as trying to introduce Node.js into a team, as I talked about in a previous video, where we try to introduce new technology to new teams. I mean, if we had tried to take this, all-or-nothing mentality with introducing Node.js or Ruby or whatever it was, well, I mean, that video speaks for itself. I shut the guy down that wanted to bring Ruby into the team because there was too much risk. But later on, when I found that path that would just let me introduce Ruby a little bit at a time, well, then it was a different story. Then it wasn't an all-or-nothing mentality. Then it was like, oh, hey, this is a useful tool, and we can use it here, and it's not going to cause any problems. And having that kind of slow growth path from A to B, it made that entire Ruby experience completely different. And the same thing happened for me with Node.js. When I first started writing in Node.js, it was like, oh, well, there's this thing my friend wanted me to try out, and it's kind of cool, but I don't really know how I could ever use it. I started using it anyways. I just played with it, and eventually I found a few places where it would replace an existing tool or an existing very basic web framework that I was using for a demo application. And it just grew from there until eventually I was writing Node the whole time. And there are just countless stories of how that mentality is going to be so much more effective than the all-or-nothing mentality. Everywhere you go, everywhere you look, you're going to see far more success with the let's take it one step at a time and let's find a way to move from there to here or from here to there. There's going to be so much more success in your efforts, so much more success in your career. Everything from architecture all the way down to new technologies, to new processes on your team, to whatever it is. And for me, right now in my career, the functional JavaScript thing is kind of a reminder of the problems that I've had with the all-or-nothing mentality in the past, where I've tried to just dive in headfirst into Haskell or Erlang or whatever it was, and I just walk away with a headache because I can't understand the language being used and the way things work. But now, in these functional JavaScript videos that I've been recording lately, these videos are very much taking an incremental approach, and I'm having a lot of success with it now. I've got currying in some of my production applications. I've got functional purity in the back of my mind all the time when I'm writing functions. There are so many different aspects of functional JavaScript that I can actually use in my production code now because I got rid of that all or nothing mentality. So the next time you're faced with a decision on whether or not to bring some new tool or technology or process or whatever it is into your team, think about the migration path to get you from where you are today to where you want to be with that new whatever it is. Find a way to get rid of that all or nothing mentality. And do that in more than just your process and your tools. Make sure your architecture supports that as well, which is incredibly difficult at times. But make sure you can yank out that database and you're not going to completely destroy the entire application. Yeah, it's going to be difficult to replace the database, but you can do it because the database is not completely central in the application. It's not so baked in and so difficult to remove that you can't do anything but use that database. That Angular application, could you replace it with Ember? That Backbone application that's legacy sitting back there and you have no idea how to work on it, could you replace part of it? Get rid of that all or nothing mentality. And your career and your projects and everything about you as a software developer will see far more success. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I would highly recommend to subscribe to the channel so you can stay up to date with thoughts on code presented by WatchMeCode.net.